Good morning, everyone. Here's your Mormon News Update for March 6th, 2025. First off, today we're going to go to the Salt Lake Tribune, where it says, the Utah House and Senate appear to be on a collision course with competing bills about how much cities should be able to charge in fees for one of the state's largest landowners, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The issue revolves around transportation utility fees, which a dozen Utah cities charge to residents and businesses to fund road improvements and maintenance. But the two chambers are at odds over the extent to which churches should be exempt from paying those fees. The LDS Church, in particular, is at the center of the debate. Tuesday morning, the Senate passed SB 310, sponsored by Senator Brady Brammer, a Republican from Pleasant Grove, by a vote of 17-8. Brammer's bill completely exempts churches in the state from paying the fees, whether it be for roads that provide access to ward houses or synagogues, church-owned schools, or potentially church-owned shopping malls. About an hour later, the House passed HB 454, sponsored by Representative Karen Peterson, a Republican from Clinton, which doesn't exempt religious organizations from paying the fees at all. This is one more exemption for one more fee, which means you and I will continue to pay more and more and more, while some of the largest landowners in this state will continue to pay less, said Representative Casey Snyder, a Republican from Paradise. Speaking against the limited exemption, I think we have to find a fundamental fairness on this. Snyder said churches don't pay property tax, which means they don't help pay for water projects funded with property taxes either. He said Peterson had found consensus with stakeholders on the bill, with the exception of one organization. I think we all know what they're talking about there. Peterson's bill was the product of a 2-year process that included the LDS Church to put some guardrails on how cities structure transportation utility fees. I just don't think it's right that the entity gets one more carve-out from fees when they already have so many other carve-outs as it relates to property tax, Snyder said. Peterson encouraged her colleagues to extend some exemption to churches, or else one of our cities is going to be sued. If efforts to exempt religious institutions from transportation utility fees, one city would likely see more impact than any other: Provo, Utah. The LDS Church has constructed 2 temples within its city limits, has dozens of meeting houses in the city, and for 150 years has operated the 738-acre main campus of Brigham Young University there. This is a particular problem for my city because there is so much of the property that they have that is tied up in nonprofits, hospitals, universities, churches, etc., said Representative Norm Thurston, a Republican from Provo. And the reality is that whenever we exempt somebody, the tax doesn't go away. It gets shifted onto somebody else. A spokesman for the LDS Church did not respond to questions about the church's stance or involvement in either bill. Brammer said he thinks there's room to find a middle ground, but acknowledged that we may not get to a compromise, but that's okay. If there isn't some settlement reached, Brammer said there may be grounds for the LDS Church to go to court, but the church isn't a particularly lawsuit-hungry entity. Did he say that with a straight face? I do wonder. The church has recently threatened a lawsuit against a small town in Texas so that they can build a giant building there, which they won't pay property tax on or contribute to the community in that way. Of all the churches, the LDS Church absolutely does not need any tax or fee breaks. Like the article says, they have land and buildings all over Utah, and they should help pay for the infrastructure there, just like everybody else does. Now let's go to KSL.com, where it says Lori Vallow Daybell says she will be exonerated, and she's telling her story in a television interview set to air Friday on Dateline. Daybell is behind bars in Arizona at the Maricopa County Jail waiting trial for the death of her 4th husband, Charles Vallow. Her current husband, Chad Daybell, is on death row in Idaho. Dressed in an orange jumpsuit and wearing purple handcuffs, Lori Daybell spoke with NBC correspondent Keith Morrison in what the network describes as an extensive and often combative interview. I will be exonerated. We will both be exonerated in the future, Daybell said, referring to her husband, Chad Daybell. I have seen things in the future that Jesus showed me when I was in heaven, and we were not in jail, and we were not in prison. Speaking of the Daybells and visions, let's talk about Julie Barnett, who used to go by Julie Rowe. She was very popular in the Mormon world 10 to 20 years ago after she claimed to have a near-death experience in 2004 and then wrote a series of books about her NDE and the end times. In 2020, she received further attention when Chad Daybell, who we just spoke about, her former publisher, was arrested in connection with the murders of his wife and his lover's 2 children. Julie Barnett initially defended Daybell's character and said she was convinced of his innocence. She later claimed Daybell had essayed her in 2018. I had many Mormon friends who were enamored with Julie Barnett, and her prophecies. They went so far as to say things like, "Reading her books strengthened my testimony and kept me in the church. I felt the Spirit so strongly while reading her books, and the principles in her books saved my marriage." Well, Julie recently published a prophecy on Facebook that says the following: Wasatch wake-up earthquake, less than 10 days remain. She then has the date, time, and location where she was when she received this prophecy. March 4th, 2025, 12:36 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Las Vegas, Nevada. And it says, with less than 10 days left until the prophesied Wasatch wake-up earthquake, visionary Julie K. Barnett continues to sound the call for preparation. What to expect when the earth shakes: widespread shaking, reports of falling glass, structural damage, and collapsing buildings will fill the news. Unprepared residents caught off guard. Many will wake up disoriented, struggling to process what is happening. Power and infrastructure failures. Outages are expected across Salt Lake City and the surrounding areas. Supermarkets and supply chains disrupted. Food, water, and essentials will disappear quickly. Increased volcanic and tectonic activity worldwide. The spiritual meaning of this event. Barnett emphasizes that this earthquake is not just about geological shifts, but spiritual shifts. I have seen this moment for years, says Barnett. This is the beginning of a series of events that will reshape not just the land, but the hearts of the people. Those who are listening and preparing will be ready. Those who ignore the warning will be caught off guard. End of release. Transmission confirmed. Then she attached what she called a press release that says, subject, urgent, Wasatch wake-up earthquake, warning for March 13th, 2025. So she gives a specific date there. Dear newsroom, I'm reaching out on behalf of Julie K. Barnett, a prophetic witness and visionary who has issued an urgent call to action regarding a major earthquake predicted to strike along the Wasatch Fault in Utah on March 13th, 2025. This public safety warning urges residents to prepare immediately for what has been foreseen as the Wasatch wake-up earthquake, with the epicenter near the University of Utah. This event has been revealed through prophetic insight and confirmed through deep spiritual alignment. The time is now. With each passing day, the urgency grows. We are now just days away. This message is not about fear, it's about preparedness, awareness, and acting in wisdom. Please find the full press release attached with critical details on what to expect and how to prepare. We are calling on media outlets to help share this urgent message and ensure the public has time to take necessary precautions. For media inquiries, interviews, or further details, please contact the Julie Barnett Energy team. This is the moment, the time is now. End of transmission confirmed. I'm pretty interested to see what's going to happen if on March 13th her prediction doesn't come true. Now we're going to go to the Deseret News, where it says Utah Valley University's first gentleman, Jeffrey Stewart Tolk, filled the 9 years that he lived after he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease with vigor, humor, Christ-like love for others, and devotion to his wife. Tolk died February 5th at age 61 after suffering a pulmonary embolism while climbing Cotopaxi, an active volcano that rises 19,347 feet above central Ecuador. It was an exercise he intentionally embraced to combat the symptoms of Parkinson's. Months earlier, he went skydiving for the first time. It then has a section called Honored by an Apostle. Jeff's self-discipline was an example and inspiration to all who paid attention. He showed us what courage means in real life day-to-day, said Elder D. Todd Christofferson of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Elder Christofferson said he took comfort in the knowledge of Jeff's present place and happiness in the spirit world, because all suffering, all injustice, all hurt and pain are made right by the resurrection of Jesus Christ. He is the end of the human predicament, the great light of hope and happiness, Elder Christofferson said, and I take joy in bearing my own witness of the reality of that resurrection and what that means for each of us, eternal life and mortality. Now, this got me thinking about Mormon funerals. I have been to a few in my time, but only one since I stopped attending church. And the feeling was much different as a former member attending a funeral in a Mormon chapel than it was previously. I decided to look up what the church handbook says about funerals in Mormon chapels, and while it's disturbing to me, it's not surprising. Let's read a few sentences. This comes from section 29.5.4 of the General Handbook from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. If a funeral for a member is held in a church building, the bishop conducts it. A funeral conducted by the bishop, whether in a church building or elsewhere, is a church meeting and a religious service. So it's no longer a funeral. It should be a spiritual occasion. The bishop urges participants to maintain a spirit of reverence and dignity. When I see that now, it just means that your funeral has to be very somber. And while I do think funerals are an important time to process grief, I think they're also a very important time to celebrate the life of the person who has passed. The handbook goes on to say, when a bishop conducts a funeral, he or one of his counselors oversees the planning of the service. He considers the wishes of the family, ensuring that the funeral is simple and dignified with music and brief addresses centered on the gospel, not centered on the person who has passed away. The comfort offered by Jesus Christ because of his atonement and resurrection should be emphasized. Family members are not required to speak or otherwise participate in the service. So if you have a funeral in a Mormon chapel, it's no longer a funeral. It's a church service. You don't even have to participate. If it's your mom, your child, your sibling who dies, you don't even have to participate in the planning. You just have to show up and listen to the bishop or one of his counselors talk about Jesus. It also says funerals are an opportunity to pay tribute to the deceased. However, such tributes should not dominate the service. Well, thank God I won't be having my funeral in a Mormon church building. I would love for there to be space for people at my funeral to have all of the emotions that they are feeling. And I would love for there to be sadness, but also joy, possibly dancing. No thanks on the Mormon church funeral. And last up today, I want to read this great bit of information that was posted on the Facebook group, Spirit of a Hippie. When someone asked why I no longer speak to a certain person, I gave an honest answer. Their response, why don't you be the bigger person and reach out? People often confuse being the bigger person with constantly reopening old wounds, hoping for a different outcome. But real growth means knowing when to step back. It means recognizing when a relationship has become toxic, when conversations lead nowhere, and choosing peace over endless cycles of frustration. Reaching out over and over only to be met with the same disrespect, broken trust, or unresolved issues is draining. Being the bigger person doesn't mean tolerating mistreatment. It means prioritizing your own well-being. It's okay to leave behind relationships that no longer serve you, to protect your peace, and to love people from a distance when closeness only brings chaos. Some chapters don't need revisiting, and some doors are meant to stay closed. And that's your update for today, folks. I absolutely hope you have the day that you deserve.